That's the joke. You know how that easy that is to say? It's one of those things. Aren't you writing a book? Did you say that, like, you know, how many years ago was it? Especially when you're as active as I am and on the road. I actually wrote a book, I sat down and took about 3 weeks in the spring of last year. That's 2014. And then it took, now it's finally, we're going to be releasing the cover art in about 2 weeks, and the book's coming out next month. And it doesn't look this unattractive. But intriguingly, I hear that all the time, but only everybody in the front could hear that. But yeah, I mean, I've spent a lot of years out on the road doing a lot of speaking, and I resisted writing because I didn't want to, in all truth, I didn't want my words to be crystallized and boiled down to this black and white thing on a page that people would then sort of intellectualize it and have sort of a different experience of it. And I also wasn't sure if writing, if I would get the same rush that I do from speaking. But you know what, I did. So I'm in a major transition now where the second book's already half written. The third book's completely laid out. And I'm making a transition from lots of road stuff, being out on the road a lot away from my family, into we're going to be doing like a lot of webcasting across the world, and we're doing like different module classes and things, and I'll still travel a little bit. But you know, it all started not right here in this room per se, but right in this area in South Jersey. And if I still lived here, this would be the place that we would gather, because it's so joyful. But yeah, I wanted to, I'm not going to read from the book because that sounds blah, but I want to read a quote that starts the book off. And I got to say, you know, it's pretty amazing that with all the different quote clearances I had to get, but the day, like maybe 3 weeks ago, when the office phone lights up and it says Self-Realization Fellowship, which is Paramahansa Yogananda's organization, and they actually called and said that they were honored that a quote of his was leading off my book right in the beginning on its own page. So I just want to read that quote to you because it's got a lot to do with what I'm going to talk about here. It says, "Sound or vibration is the most powerful force in the universe. Music is a divine art to be used not only for pleasure, but as a path to God realization. Vibrations resulting from devotional singing, I would say, or toning, lead to attunement with the cosmic vibration or the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." That's from a Yogananda book called Cosmic Chants. I'm going to take this thing off. I don't do well with wire mics because of my energy, but I'll do my best. I feel like a caged monkey. Am I off camera? I can still do that. The cord's long enough. There's something that I've mentioned in some of my talks in the past, but I've never really talked about publicly. Because one of the things that people ask me a lot is, how did I get into what I'm doing? And of course, I've got 20 seconds, and they want me to give them my whole life story. How did you get into this? And how are you Bible stuff, ancient languages? It kind of started when I was 5, but the real thing that clinched it for me, I was 7 years old, and I'm sitting on the floor of my grandmother's living room. I still remember the smell of the living room. I remember the rug I was sitting on. And I laid out 5 different Bibles, opened it up to the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the mourners, blessed are the meek. And I compared each of them to each other. And none of them, well, 2 of them kind of jived slightly. The other 3 didn't relate to any of the other 5. So in other words, there's 5 versions of the inerrant Word of God, and none of them lined up with each other. So I remember turning to my grandmother and I said, "I don't understand. I'm being told this is the Word of God. For some reason, I don't understand, but they're all different." I was like, what am I supposed to do with that? She's like, "You have to take that on faith." Well, okay. What's faith? And she said, "Well, insight for that will develop in time through faith." And I'm like, she's like, "Go talk to the minister." So I went and talked to our minister, Methodist Church, thank God, because I didn't get fireballs thrown in my face, all the guilt and shame, and had great naps. Learned how to sit in the balcony and make spitballs, and then they had to have someone sit up with us every Sunday in the balcony. This is all in East Greenwich Township here, South Jersey. They had to have somebody sitting with us because of, you know, what kids do watching us. That's not true. But I went to the minister and I asked the same thing, and he's like, well, you got to take that on faith. And I'm like, what's faith? He's like, well, that develops in time through faith. And I'm like, okay, you're not answering the question. About 3 weeks later, I'm in a vacation Bible school class. It was midsummer 1970-something. And I'm sitting there. We were talking about the Bible verses of, like, you know, lay up for yourself treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy, all this stuff. And I'm looking at the page, and everybody's talking about heaven as this place you go to after you drop dead. Funny thing was, there was nothing in that, even in the King James Bible, that actually said that in the context that we were looking at it. But I kept asking questions, and after a while, the teacher stopped calling on me. Put it that way. That take it on faith thing means shut up, kid. That's the translation. And I've never actually talked about this publicly before, and the reason I've never talked about it publicly was because I don't want people looking at me saying, oh, well, he's special. He has something somebody else doesn't. So I just shut my trap about it. But I'm looking down at the page, and it was a Bible that all the words, you know, one of my Bibles, you know, the red words are the words of Jesus. This one was all black words. And I'm looking down, and I just was kind of looking at the words, and I sort of phased out the teacher. She sounded like the teacher on Charlie Brown at that point. And I'm looking at the words, and all of a sudden I see my hand shaking even thinking about it, if you can see there. Maybe that's the espresso. But these multicolored layers start showing up. The best way I can explain it is inside the page or behind the page, behind the words. It was almost like the page got a depth to it, physically, that went down about maybe an inch. And there was these layers of different characters and letters and things that I didn't understand. Today I'm clear that one was Koine Greek and one was what's called Ashurit, which is a form of writing in Hebrew. And I'm looking at it, and I'm not sure exactly what's going on. But I do remember exactly how I felt, because I felt, all of a sudden I felt not hot, but really cold. And my face felt really cold, but all of a sudden my neck felt hot. And I'm looking down at the page, and I look up, and I realize that the room's empty and the lights are out. I'm like, okay. And the teacher sticks her head back in the doorway, and she looks at me like, whatever this kid did, it's got to be bad, because I must have had a look on my face like I saw a ghost, or my hand in the cookie jar or something like that. And I remember her looking at me almost like, what have you been doing in here? And she's like, are you coming? And I'm like, I remember shaking my head, didn't say anything, and I stood up and I started walking out through the doorway, down the hallway, following everybody else after the teacher, down the steps, out to this baseball field behind the church. And it was like I was breathing. I'm 7 years old at this point, so I guess this would have been, what, 79? I'm breathing, and it's like, it's almost like I was breathing in, this sounds crazy, even from the perception of a 7-year-old, but it was like I was breathing in the stars. I had this sensation that I wasn't really breathing, I was being breathed, and that I was everything. And I look up at the trees, and there was this light breeze, and I heard this really high, like, whistling sound, almost like chimes or something, really, really high chimes. And then this angel comes down with these big white wings. No, but it's your time, son. No. I remember looking around at the trees, and I'm seeing all of these little dancing lights. Today I would identify that as a fractal. Little geometric patterns, self-similar patterns, basically the matrix behind everything, if you look into science. And I remember the teacher still looking at me like, what's this kid doing? She probably thought I was on drugs or something at the age of 7. It was an interesting experience for me that I had no place I could categorize it. There's nothing I could do to put it in a box to say, okay, this is what this is. I didn't talk to anybody about it, because it wasn't so much that I thought it was special, I just thought it was weird, so I kept it to myself. Right around that time, I started going to the little stream down the hill from my house, and I would sit in the stream, and then I would lay back in the stream. And I would let everything but my nose be submerged, and just my nose would be out, and I would just lay there still, not knowing I'm meditating, and I would basically be unmoving for a half hour, an hour, until I didn't feel I was separate from the water anymore. And then I would start going, just making this O sound or an ah sound or an sound. And then I used to love playing in the little irrigation tunnel that went from our side of the road to the farm across the street. And actually, from back to the time I was 5, I would sit in the tunnel right in the middle under the road, and I'd hear the cars going over top of me. This tunnel was like this big to me, so if I went back now, it's probably like that. But what was intriguing, it was it had hundreds and hundreds of these ripples in it, in the metal. And I would sit there just going, oh. And I would start hearing back not one voice, but hundreds of voices would reflect back. And I'd start losing the sense of which voice was mine and which was the reflection. But they're actually all my voice. But I would lose sense of that. I didn't know at the time I was toning. Move forward to the summer of 1995, and I'd been studying Aramaic for a little while. Not really the language itself. I hadn't even heard anything in Aramaic yet at that point. And it's 4 o'clock in the morning. This is where my book actually starts. The chapter is called Opening the God Box. 4 o'clock in the morning, and I couldn't sleep. And I wake up and I wander out into the living room of the place I was staying at, the place called Heartland, Dr. Michael Rice's teaching center in the Ozark Mountains in Missouri. If you're in the north, it's Missouri. In the south, it's Missouri. And I start digging through this box of cassettes, and I run into this one that says the Aramaic Prayer of Jesus from Rocco Errico. Although in my head, I saw Enrico Caruso, so I thought it was opera, I guess. Opera Aramaic. And I put the tape in, and I hear,
"Hello, this is Rocco Errico. Welcome to the Aramaic Prayer of Jesus."
He had a great voice, though. But then all of a sudden, he said he was going to speak the Aramaic Lord's Prayer. This is my first time hearing it. And I heard this sound, and it sounded like this. This is what I heard from him. It's more like, but the thing that I locked in on was, the first word, kind of like Om, but with an N rather than an M. It's the word translated as Our Father. Our Father is like an inane 1% out of 100% translation of that word. And it just I kept coming back to it and coming back to it and coming back to it. And I found myself walking out onto a path in the front of the house, the dirt road there, going down to Bull Shoals Lake. And I remember looking up at the trees, and the trees were dancing. There was that sparkle that I saw when I was 7 years old, and I hadn't really seen it that strongly that entire time. But now it's the middle of the night. And I looked toward the house, and I turned the light out. The light was off. And I just stood there, and I'm looking at it, and I look up at the stars and the Milky Way. I mean, it's black. We're talking dark in the middle of the Ozarks in 1995, really dark, and the sky is above me, and you can see the tails of the Milky Way coming across in the sky. And I found myself, I was barefoot. I just started walking down toward the lake, which is like a 10-minute walk. But all of a sudden, I'm there like that. Realized that I've got a paddle that I got from the house. I guess I was going canoeing at like 4:30 in the morning. I had no idea the paddle's in my hand. And I put the paddle into the canoe, and I slide the canoe that's tied to the shore, I untie it, slide it into the water, and I just kind of move the canoe into the water, and I start moving across the lake, and I go about maybe a quarter mile to this other, I guess you would call it a cove, and it's surrounded by rock walls on 3 sides. And I put the paddle across the canoe, and I just sat there, just like I did when I was a kid in the water or in the tunnel, not making a sound. And I opened my eyes, and the water was like glass. There's no ripples or anything. And all of a sudden, I start feeling that tone coming through, that oh, and it starts opening up in what felt like my heart. And I started making the sound, although it really felt like the sound was making me. There was just enough light from the starlight. Interesting, John Denver, there's a you know, I talk about the starlight, which is a reference to the song Rocky Mountain High. John Denver was talking about, it was the Perseids in August, and he was camping with some friends in the middle of the night, and he's out in the middle of the lake, and he thinks everybody else has fallen asleep. This is like 1970 or 71. And all of a sudden this comet goes smoking across the sky. But before that, you know, I see it raining fire in the sky, but before that, he realized that the star, it was a moonless night, he realized the stars were bright enough to cast shadows from the trees onto the ground. And I was having that experience myself on the lake. There was just enough starlight on the lake that I could actually see the Milky Way reflecting on the water. And somehow the Milky Way was centered over my canoe, and the ripples were going out. And I'm watching these ripples go out from the center of the Milky Way, which is actually concealed by the boat itself. And the ripples are going out. And I kept toning and I kept toning, and then all of a sudden the sounds started coming back. And then the rings were starting to come back, and they were starting to basically mix with the ones that were going out. And I started losing sense of what was going out and what was coming back. And I lost sense of which sound was leaving my mouth and what was reflecting back, not only from the canyon walls, but from the canoe and from the water itself, which was really tinny, that particular sound. And I started thinking a lot about echoes and reflections and reverberation. I swear I didn't set that up, but it was perfect. It got me thinking and feeling about how the fact of the matter is that when you're talking about ancient texts, especially the Jesus story, there's a few facts that nobody seems to want to talk about. One, nobody knows who wrote it. Two, nobody knows the original language. These are all things that are actually taught in theological seminaries as if we do know that. We don't actually. Most people don't know what they mean because we're projecting our modern idea onto something that's very ancient. But in the end, I feel like it's like we've got to learn to read the echoes of the ancient dream. In other words, realizing that not only is that a dream in terms of the past, because the past is not real, all that's real is right now, but this is all a dream. The whole thing, everything that's happening right now is not even real. Funny, philosophy and spirituality and some religion has been telling us this for millennia, but now science is confirming it, that none of this is real. And we've started to buy certain things that, me saying this makes me public enemy one to the spiritual publishing industry, which is why I turned down the big publishers for my book and why we're self-publishing through Amazon. One of the ideas that we've got to let go of, and this is going to push people's buttons, is that your thoughts create your life. Or that you become what you think about. Why do I say you don't? Because this is not your life. You are the light of life itself. This is your dream. You become what, your dream becomes what you think about. What you think about turns into your dream. But this is not your life. Your life is what is seeing through you right now. In the words of St. Francis of Assisi, what you are looking for is what is looking. I say it every time I'm here. What you are looking for is what is looking. You don't need to create a better life. You already are that perfect life. The only person that I really feel, especially in the last 150 years, that really got that fully was Ernest Holmes. And I'll be honest, a lot of places that I go to, I feel they don't really get it. You get it. I feel a lot of people are so, excuse me, busy worshiping everything that falls out of Ernie's butt that they're not realizing that they're looking at him as possessing something that they already are, and they're somehow trying to become more of that when you can't become more of everything. If you're everything, you're already everything. But what's interesting is in the dream there's these echoes or reflections, reverberations, and it's the reflection that is the self-awareness. Put it this way. If we didn't have this dream, there'd be no such thing as awareness or consciousness, because there'd only be what George Carlin called the great electron. It's not aware of itself, it just it's there. It's just there. But that's what it meant in the beginning, was the word. When I do radio shows, people ask me all the time, they're like, what's the hardest word to get from English or Aramaic and English? And I'm like, it's word. I don't understand. What do you mean? Word is the word. The word's milta in Aramaic, it's logos in the Greek. In Greek, Lexis or Lego means a word written on a page. Logos is not that. In Aramaic, the word's milta. I wrote 6 pages of definitions for milta in my book, and then I realized that was kind of inane, so I deleted about, well, pretty much all of it except for like 6 lines. And I told people each little definition here is an aspect of it, but it's not it, because there's no way to put it into words. When someone translates Aramaic, they don't write in the beginning was anything other than milta, because they know there's no word in English for it. And there was no word in Greek for it either. Not really. Interesting. Because it's not about the words and it's not about the language. It's about vibration itself. It's about frequency. It's about the realization that, and this I'm basically taking from the foreword of my book, which is written by a guy who I idolized as a child, a guy named Steve Vai, who's now a really good friend of mine, this amazing musician and guitarist, and he wrote this amazing foreword for the book that talks about at the nuclear level, how everything spins around in little tiny solar systems, and then at the galactic level, and then how we create gravitational forces by what we're thinking and how we feel in relation to what we're thinking, and how we're all waking up, and how it's all just this one big orchestra of life. But again, the orchestra is not what's real. What's real is the light itself. Your life, this dream, is your film strip in the projector, but you're not the film strip, you're the light itself. I want to leave you with another quote from Yogananda. Well, let me say just really quickly, this afternoon we're going to do toning for 2 hours, not much talking. Candlelight, a lot of really big spaces of silence, and I'm going to show you how to use the most basic sounds that you could even imagine to shift the state of your consciousness in 7 seconds or less. That's all it takes is 7 seconds, and you'll feel different that fast. Faster than breath work, meditation, prayer. There's nothing that I've ever encountered that will shift how you feel faster than toning. Except maybe an 18-wheeler flying at you in the middle of the street at about 80 miles an hour. That'll shift you pretty quick, maybe, but we don't want that particular shift. But Yogananda said that suffering and pain cease to exist for one who awakens. And he talks about being able to enjoy life as the ever-joyous witness of a stupendous cosmic drama. To take our awareness from the pseudo-soul or ego or persona or pain body and transfer it back to the realization that when you look in the mirror, what you observe is not separate from what's observing it. And the reflection is not what is real, nor is what it is reflecting. The only thing that's real is the awareness. And that's the light, and that's who you are. The rest is a dream. If you don't like your dream, shift what you're thinking. That's exactly what you're going to learn in this room, and your dream will change. But again, your dream is not who you are. But if it sucks, change it. I worked on what I'm doing a lot on the side of my regular JOB for many years. So that luck came to me in the form of what Tony Robbins says. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. And it popped. When you're open, when the gates open, when the doors open, whatever needs to happen will happen. So I'd love to have you. We've got what, 12:15 to 2:15 this afternoon. I'm going to show you some really neat things. And you're going to be able to walk out of the room and literally just take one sound and shift how you feel in a matter of seconds. I'm going to have really cool sparkly candles too. So, thank you for allowing me back into the room.